Hey everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and today we're going to do a recent reads wrap-up of the first half of June. So I've been doing really bad at making my individual book reviews as I read the books. I don't know what happened. I had a feeling at some point in the year I would just sort of spiral out of it and not be able to keep up, and it happened. I'm not great at being consistent. I didn't even talk about what I read in May. That just fell apart and I didn't have time to catch up, and now it's too late. I can't talk about those books anymore. So I want to talk about what I read the first half of June. So I read 6 books in the first half of the month. And we're going to start with American Rapture by C.J. Lead. So this was a book I pre-ordered last year, and I was excited because I loved Mayfly. Mayfly is still one of my absolute favorite female rage horror novels. I just think it's perfect, no notes. And I was hoping this would be the same. This did not work for me the way I hoped that it would. I didn't dislike it, but it wasn't what I was hoping for. So this is an apocalypse story, and we are following a character as she's living through it. And she's from a very religious Catholic family. I think she's Catholic. And I mean, that would explain the imagery on the cover. So she's from a very religious Catholic family. She's a teenage girl. She goes to private school. She was homeschooled, all those things. And she's very sheltered. And this is a story about her deconstructing her faith and her sexual awakening. That's essentially what this book is about. But it's being told through the backdrop of this apocalypse where people who get this disease or get this illness become so intoxicated that they have to be sexual right now, and they attack people, and it's very weird and a little bit graphic, but not super not as graphic as I was expecting it to be honest. Based on Mayfly was super graphic. This was not what I had expected from a book like this. It was relatively tame, and I think part of it is the sheltered nature of our protagonist. She's not she's starting to have these feelings, and she doesn't really know what to do with them, and she's seeing all these people basically have sex until they die, and she's scared that she's going to become infected with it, and she's not sure if the feelings that she's having are because of this, and what if that means, and it's an interesting story about deconstruction of faith and that kind of thing. But that's not what I was in this for. I was here for an apocalypse, and I feel the apocalypse was relatively light compared to all the stuff about religion and deconstructing and figuring out your sexuality and all of that. So I didn't hate it. I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was interesting. It just, I wanted more apocalypse. Then I read Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, and this is by Kylie Lee Baker. I got this from the library, and I really liked this. This one I gave 5 stars. And what I liked about it was this is a story about a woman who is a crime scene cleaner. That's her job. And I've read about that, and I thought it was really gross. That's not a thing I could do, to clean up something so gory. So I was really curious to read about someone who does that. But the story is really about is her dealing with the trauma of her sister's death. Her sister is killed in a very gross, dramatic way right in front of her, and it's a hate crime. And so the story is about all these people, all these Asian people being murdered, and is it a serial killer? What's happening in the story? But there's also a lot about hungry ghosts, which, I don't know, I've read about the idea of hungry ghosts before in other stories, and I was very interested in reading more about that. And I thought the way it was done in this story to do with grief and the hate crimes that are happening. This is set during COVID at the height of lockdown and stuff. So we're watching all these Asian people, and our main character being attacked and screamed at, and like it's very upsetting. Plus, like I said, the gory stuff, the hungry ghosts, the crime scenes, like I thought it was really good. Very excellent look at trauma and how trauma affects people. Like the main character is going through it, and she has like a lot of PTSD, she has OCD, and like the way she thinks about things I thought was really well done. So I really like this, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Under the Same Stars by Libba Bray. I ended up buying myself a copy of this. It's across the room. I'm not getting up, so you'll just have to look at this picture. But I read this as an ARC. It came out back in February. I'd had it for a while. And I really enjoyed this more than I expected to, which is why I purchased a copy. This is a story told in 3 different time periods, and all of those time periods kind of intertwine with each other. And it starts with a storyline in 1940s in Germany, in a little town called Kleinwald. And then we have a story in 1980-ish, I think it was 1980, in Berlin. And then we have a story in 2020 in America. And each of these stories feels very different at first until you realize why they are connected. So the 1940s storyline is following 2 girls who are best friends. One of them is very imaginative and whimsical, and they have this tree in their nearby forest that they think of as being magical, and it's like a matchmaking tree. If you put a letter in it, you might get a letter back, and it might find you your like perfect person. And so we start with that, but the story is more about like these girls getting involved in the resistance. And then we're following the 2 characters in the 1980s. One of them is a girl whose family has just moved there from America for her father's job, and she gets involved in the punk scene and falls in love with a girl. And then in 2020, we're following a boy who is stuck in lockdown. He has 2 mothers. Both of them are stuck at work. One of them is in another country doing her job, and she's trapped there. And one of them is a nurse at a hospital, or a doctor at a hospital, I don't remember. And so she can't come home. So we have this kid who's kind of like, he's a teenager. He's stuck at home. He's talking to his friends on Zoom and like going to school through Zoom. And him and his best friend are unraveling a mystery about her grandmother. So I thought the way the storylines intertwined was amazing. Personally, my favorite was the 1940s storyline. I thought that was the most vivid of the 3. I also really enjoyed the 1980s storyline because I haven't read a ton about what it was like to be in Germany in that time, like with the Berlin Wall and stuff. And the punk scene stuff was really interesting. So I really like those 2. The 2020 storyline was fine. Like I didn't dislike it. It just wasn't my favorite. But I did like the part where they're like unraveling the family history. So all in all, I thought this was really well done. Very good. Bought a copy for my library, so I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor for book club. You can go back and watch our book club live to see my full thoughts on this book. I'll just briefly touch on it quick here. This is a story about a Black disabled woman whose family is from Nigeria, and so she's an author. At the beginning of the story, she's teaching writing and getting increasingly frustrated with some of her students, and has a little bit of a meltdown and decides that this isn't for her. She needs to focus on her writing. She's already tried before to get published and it was not successful. And so she takes this in a different direction and she writes this sci-fi story about robots. And it becomes wildly successful. And the story is about her kind of dealing with fame, as well as dealing with her family, who is like an immigrant family from Nigeria, and what that experience is like. I loved the stuff about her family, and I really found the stuff about like her fame to be really interesting. Didn't really fully get there's sections of the story that is her novel, did not get that stuff. And I read this whilst suffering from migraines. Like, I was just listening to the audiobook because I could not even look at it with my eyeballs. And I feel like I missed a key element from that part of the story. I really want to go back and reread it because I think once I do read it again, it'll all click into place, kind of like how I did with Fifth Season, which the first time I read it, totally didn't understand that book. Read it a second time and everything clicked and I loved it. I think that's the case here. I think there's some element I missed in my muddled brain from all the migraines, but I really want to read it again because I think this could be a 5, but for now I'm saying it was a 4. Then, because American Rapture was a miss for me, I really wanted another apocalypse story, and I read The Unworthy by Augustine Batserica. This is actually not really an apocalypse though, this is more dystopian, but I think it works too for an apocalypse because this is set in a near future after a bunch of like terrible climate disasters have happened and the world is uninhabitable. We're following this girl who is living in this like convent, but they don't worship God and Jesus and any of that. They have like this new God that they worship, and she is one of the unworthy, which means like she's like, I don't know how to explain this. They have like these different rankings, and if you're an unworthy, you just kind of work there, you help out, you do things, and they give you food and a place to live. But some of them get to rise up and become, I don't know what they call it, and more enlightened, I guess. And they get like tortured for their God in order to bring about this new world that they need to live in. And the story is about her reckoning with that, and she falls in love with one of the girls at the convent, and that is obviously not something they're supposed to be doing. And she's also reflecting back on what her life was like before she came here, and it was a really interesting story. I like the concept of what was happening here. I just wish, it's really short, and I wish that there had been more. Like, the story is about like her writing a journal and trying to like write down everything she remembers from before and everything that's happening right now, as to leave like a written record. But she's also afraid for anyone to find it because if they find it, she'll be killed. And so she's trying to keep this in secret, and like the story is very compelling. Like, I did not expect as much as I got out of this. Like, I found it really interesting. Editing Emily. As I'm working on this video, I was like, oh, I wanted to say something and I forgot all about it until just now. So when I'm talking about The Unworthy, something that struck me while I was reading it, and even more so now that I've been thinking about it for a minute, if you've read A Cloud of Outrageous Blue by, oh, what is the author's name? I'll put a picture. But anyway, I think it actually really reminded me a lot of that, except obviously The Unworthy is more horror, and A Cloud of Outrageous Blue is more like a YA historical, but they're really similar in so many ways. Like, they're both set in convents, they're both following a girl who has come from some kind of traumatic background and is still like reckoning with what happened because of that. They're both dealing with a character who is falling in love with somebody, and they're both dealing with characters who are trapped because the world outside is too dangerous, and they're trying to find a way to help humanity. So like, in a lot of ways, they're really freaking similar. So if you liked A Cloud of Outrageous Blue, you might like The Unworthy. Just know that The Unworthy is a lot darker. I give this like 4.25 stars. And then the last book I want to talk about is We Are Not From Here. This is by Jenny Torres Sanchez, and I read this for the Build Your Library Level 12 update. I really wanted to include something to do with immigration and immigrants, especially like modern immigrants. And I remembered I had this on my shelves. This is a story about 3 teenagers who are escaping from, I think, Guatemala. So they're escaping from Guatemala into Mexico to get to the border and get into the United States. And it starts with like them living in Guatemala and what that was like for them and why they needed to escape. So you have these two boys and a girl, and you're jumping back and forth between the two main protagonists, Pequeña and Polka, and their stories as to what happens to them in their home in Guatemala and why they are escaping to get to the United States. And then you follow them on the journey. And it is harrowing. But I think what I liked about this is that it paints a very vivid picture of what it's actually like what is at stake here? Why are people coming across the border? Why is it so important to get here? And like what they have to do in order to get here. Like so many people don't even make it. They don't make it all the way here. And I think it was a really important story. And I think I really appreciate what the author did here. I will tell you that it's sad. It's very upsetting, and but I do think it's still worth reading it. And I think, especially right now, I think we need to be reading things like this. So definitely recommend it. I gave this 5 stars. So that's everything I read in the first half of June. I'd like to hear what you've read so far this month, and I will be back at the end of the month to share the rest of my reading month with you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye!